Oshawa.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've had the opportunity to learn many new things since being elected, and every time I speak on behalf of my constituents, I ensure that I have done my homework. I want to be sure that their voices are heard in this legislature. I also want to know all that I can about issues that affect the province. So here I stand to discuss the budget and to fight to keep hydro public. The teacher in me cannot resist the opportunity to shed a bit of light on the proud history of public hydro and electricity. Since we are literally standing here on the verge of a new government-induced dark age, literally, our province is on the brink of a time that families and businesses won't be able to afford to keep their lights on. And since that is the case, let me share a bit about public power so we can fully appreciate it for the next few weeks that we still have it. I'd like to share an article from the Dictionary of Canadian Biography on Sir Adam Beck. But before I do, I'll flash forward. Sir Adam Beck fought for public hydro. He was knighted because he championed good ideas for the people. In fact, a statue was erected in his honour. A bronze monument of Sir Adam Beck is not far from here. Schools have been named in his memory, schools that soon might not be able to pay for their electricity and might, like so many others, might have to close when costs skyrocket and funding evaporates. But I digress. I'll read part of an article researched and written by H.V. Nels. The Prometheus of Canadian politics during the first quarter of the 20th century, Sir Adam Beck brought the inestimable benefit of cheap electric light and power to the citizens of Ontario through a publicly owned utility, the Hydroelectric Power Commission of Ontario. He had to fight continuously to build hydro, as it came to be called, but supported by municipal allies, he succeeded in creating one of the largest publicly owned integrated electric systems in the world. Adam Beck, more than any other public figure in Ontario, reshaped the institutional life of the province by making electricity a public utility and legitimizing, through his accomplishments, public ownership as an effective instrument of policy throughout Canada." End quote. Beck is quoted as insisting that, quote, "It is the duty of the government to see that development is not hindered by permitting a handful of people to enrich themselves out of these treasures at the expense of the general public." What a great thought. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to read it again. "It is the duty of the government to see that development is not hindered by permitting a handful of people to enrich themselves out of the treasures at the expense of the general public." Continuing from the article, Beck, quote, "extolled the power of abundant, cheap light to brighten the homes of working people. Cheap electricity would create more jobs in the factories of the province, hydro would lighten the drudgery of the barn and the household, and electric railways radiating out from the cities into the countryside would create more prosperous, progressive farms, even as light and power made brighter, cleaner cities." End quote. In 1914, just more than 100 years ago, he received a knighthood. And here we are, 100 years later, rushed debating, probably in 6.5 hours, so that this majority government can tear public hydro down and sell it for parts to some backroom money crowd. When I realized that the Premier of our province in just a few weeks will have sold affordable public power without the understanding or support of the people of this province, all the while knowing it is a despicable thing to do, it turns my stomach, Mr. Speaker. The Premier of this province and leader of the Government of Ontario is actually undertaking to punch the lights out of the middle class and the business community, and to make sure that our struggling economy can now look forward to struggling in the dark. She is ensuring that small businesses will always stay small and won't be able to pay their bills. Wynn's money crowd wants to make a quick buck while the rest of us pay the price. So just to review, Sir Adam Beck wanted to brighten the homes of working people. Premier Kathleen Wynne wants to ensure higher rates for families who are already paying the highest bills in Canada. Sir Adam Beck knew that cheap electricity would create more jobs in the factories of the province. And Premier Kathleen Wynne wants to ensure that companies like General Motors pay more and more to do business here, and is undermining the goal of strengthening opportunities for growth in manufacturing. Sir Adam Beck knew that hydro would lighten the drudgery of the barn and the household. Premier Kathleen Wynne doesn't seem to care that constituents across this province already can scarcely afford to heat their homes or use their appliances, and now she might expect them to ration their electric light usage. She wants us back in the dark ages. This government likes to keep Ontarians in the dark, and now she wants Ontarians to live in the dark. And if you think I'm being dramatic, which might happen, I will put you in touch with my constituents who are still trying to pay bills from 2 winters ago.
That's right.
People who live in a basement apartment and only have one baseboard heater that they have to ration use of so they can afford to eat. And that's just because of deregulation since 1999. What on earth are they going to do once their rates jump another 20% or so? Sir Adam Beck proposed that electric railways radiating out from the cities into the countryside would create more prosperous, progressive farms, while light and power made brighter, cleaner cities. But Premier Kathleen Wynne just celebrated a diesel train and has pretended that the point of selling off revenue-generating assets was to invest in transit. They are sneak-selling a revenue-generating asset that puts money into our provincial health care, into our provincial education, into communities across the province, to put 3% of what's been promised into the Toronto pot for Toronto Transit. And I begrudge Toronto nothing. But 3% at the expense of every business and household across the province? Who came up with this plan?
Not a good investment.
The Liberals across from us seem surprised by the little details that we've been bringing forward from Bill 91. Who wrote this bill? The Minister of Finance doesn't seem to have read the fine print. Maybe things are different on that side, but over here, when we write a bill, we're involved in the process. I've got a private member's bill coming up, and I know what's in it, because that's my job. My name is going to be on it. It is intending to make something better, to fix something. And Bill 91 is tearing apart our public power and making a mockery of our democratic process. Shame on this Premier, and shame on the Liberal caucus that isn't standing up to her and isn't standing up for their constituents. But to finish the story of Sir Adam Beck, and to again quote from the article, quote, he worried on his deathbed that political partisanship would overcome it and that hydro as an independent entity would not survive. But in his absence, it continued to flourish, firmly rooted in the towns and cities, along the back concessions and amongst the merchants, workers, farmers and homemakers of this province. Hydroelectricity generated and delivered by a Crown corporation to municipally owned utilities at the lowest cost had become an Ontario institution that would outlive changing governments and passing ideologies. End quote. Until now. Until Premier Kathleen Wynne. Until 2015, when this short-sighted Liberal government plans to pull the plug on public power. Mr. Speaker, New Democrats have invited Ontarians to fight against the sale of Hydro One, and Mr. Speaker, you can too if you go to www.youpaytheprice.ca. We are also holding town halls and meetings across the province, but since you weren't able to make it to our roundtable in Oshawa, I'll be happy to tell you about it. Andrea Horvath and I hosted a roundtable discussion to hear from local voices about the sale of hydro. We are fortunate to have a very active local coalition called Keep Hydro Public, and I am pleased to read to you from their presentation. Quote, Keep Hydro Public is a group of concerned Oshawa citizens. We are not opposed to transit and infrastructure and realize that every budget has plums and barbs, but the sell-off of Hydro One as a barb will raise hydro rates and have a direct impact on manufacturing jobs all across Ontario, and we believe it will be difficult to retain the jobs we presently have. Wasteful spending scandals on e-health, Orange, gas plants, software glitches, etc. could have paid for transit and infrastructure without selling Hydro One. End quote. Also at that meeting, Mr. Speaker, were teachers who recognized the damage that even less funding as a result of less revenue would do and how it would impact our education system and students. At the meeting were community members who can't understand why this government won't listen to anyone. At the meeting were electricians who were concerned about what privatizing and lack of oversight will mean in terms of safety standards and certification. Electricity isn't a game, Mr. Speaker. This is serious. Again, it's clear that this government is making a rash, short-sighted decision where communities will be paying the price. Oshawa, like cities across the province, is concerned about what this sell-off will mean. And this isn't partisan. This is a provincial concern. I would like to share the front page of Business Matters, which is a regular publication in my community from the Greater Oshawa Chamber of Commerce. And the headline, Budgets 2015, Business Drowning in Energy Debt and No Go for Durham. I'll read excerpts from it to share the voice of businesses on this issue, Mr. Speaker. Quote, with the Ontario budget just completed, the Ontario Chamber and the Chamber Network are concerned about the government's decisions that are negatively impacting business, undermining the capacity of businesses to grow and create jobs in Ontario. The Ontario Energy Board recently announced that starting May 1st, rates will go up by $571 per month for an average Ontario household. However, this hydro rate increase has far greater significance for businesses. Increases will range between 7% and 15% per kilowatt hour, impacting, for example, restaurants, fast food outlets, and small industry that operate during on-peak and mid-peak times. This takes on much greater significance given the backdrop of an impending partial sale of Hydro One. And the Chamber goes on, Mr. Speaker. Budget 2015 does little to address businesses' concerns over rising electricity rates, states Bob Malcolmson, CEO of the Greater Oshawa Chamber of Commerce. And according to the most recent Ontario Chamber survey, rising electricity prices are the #1 factor hurting business competitiveness. Last year alone, 2,700 companies left Ontario. End quote. Speaker, just this past week it was announced that 1,000 jobs at GM will be gone. That's 1,000 good-paying jobs just gone. In the auto industry, one job in manufacturing has 7 to 10 spin-off jobs in the connected industry. That's a lot of workers. Those are a lot of families. Those are a lot of connected businesses. And on the heels of that announcement, this government is ramming through this legislation with no one wanting them to do it. Ramming through legislation to increase the cost of electricity and the cost of doing business in Ontario. How can businesses exist when they can't predict the rising costs or afford to pay them? Mr. Speaker, who is driving this runaway train? Speaker, I wonder through you to the Premier, what hydro experts have they talked to on this issue? What do you even know about hydro? What's required to build and maintain an efficient hydro system? What do you understand about generation, transmission, and distribution systems? Who is your expert? And what do they know about it? Because Ed Clark is a banker. So who's your hydro expert? Who is advising you? You don't know what you're selling and why you are selling it. And if you haven't talked to a hydro expert, then you don't know what you're doing. Paul Connert worked in the industry for 33 years. He knows hydro. And I'm glad to be able to share parts of a recent article that he wrote for the Hamilton Spectator. Paul worked in the industry, as I said, for 33 years and was spokesperson for the Ontario Electricity Coalition from 2001 to 2010, which campaigned against hydro privatization across the province and stopped the sale of Hydro One in court in the spring of 2002. The title of the article was "Wyn's Sale of Hydro One is a Betrayal of the Public Interest." So from the article, Mr. Speaker, if you're driving your car and the steering wheel comes off in your hands, do you step on the gas or step on the brakes? Hydro rates are out of control in Ontario, and with the proposed sale of Hydro One, Kathleen Wynne is stepping on the gas. Where is the demand coming from? There are no public demonstrations outside Queen's Park demanding that Hydro One be sold. The demand is coming from Bay Street and the investment community. Wynne is also looking for a quick fix for Ontario's deficit. There is no such thing as free money. There are permanent consequences from privatization. Giving up forever all future revenue, now $1 billion a year, for a one-time cash payment for Hydro One is not a very wise thing to do. He continues, Mr. Speaker. Wynne is promising that money from the sale will go towards transportation infrastructure. Infrastructure lasts 40 to 50 years and then needs to be rebuilt again. The problem with selling public assets is that you can only sell them once. We said 14 years ago that it's like burning your furniture to heat your home. What do you burn next? The private sector does a fabulous job of manufacturing transformers, insulators, wire, relays, switches, connectors, and all the materials we need to build our electrical system, but they do a poor job of running hydro in the public interest. They can't. Their fiduciary duty legally requires them to maximize profits for their shareholders. Now, more than $1 billion a year goes out of the province in private power profits. That money used to go out to businesses and citizens in the form of low and stable rates. Politicians did not sell Ontario Hydro during the depths of the Great Depression, nor during the height of the Second World War. Those economic times were far worse than what we face now. Those politicians wisely kept hydro to create jobs and to help the economy recover from those lean times. The world's climate is in trouble. Now more than ever, it is critical that governments have the levers of public ownership to curb global warming and institute real conservation programs. The hydro privatization experiment has failed in Ontario. In fact, there is not one jurisdiction anywhere in the world where privatization hasn't resulted in big rate hikes. The promise of deregulation was, quote, lower rates. The promise of smart meters was, quote, smart meters will save you money. Both promises were completely false. He continues, Mr. Speaker, if you can imagine. Kathleen Wynne needs to scrap the idea of selling Hydro One and put the brakes on hydro deregulation and privatization. It's in the public interest, both for the economy and the environment. It's important to note that during the provincial election on September 5, 2003, McGuinty, low in the polls, took the main campaign plank from the NDP and promised public power. Closing the phony IESO electricity market and regulating rates would be a good start on that promise. Let's remember that Sir Adam Beck, a Tory, backed by business after a 10-year campaign and 18 municipal referendums, brought public power to Ontario in 1905. For 95 years, Ontario grew and prospered under public power. On his deathbed, Sir Adam Beck said, quote, I wish I could have lived long enough to build a band of iron around hydro to keep it safe from the politicians. He might have added, and safe from the profiteers. End quote. I'm pleased to be able to share these words from Paul Connaught, who remembers because he'd gone through this back in 2002. And Mr. Speaker, back in 2002, Judge Gans ruled on April 19th that the provincial government did not have the right to sell Hydro One and that it belonged to the people of Ontario. Ernie Eves didn't like that. So in June of 2002, Eves passed Bill 58, which gave the Tory government the legal ability to sell Hydro One. But they didn't dare sell it, because the Star poll of the day said that 94% of Ontarians didn't want it. Mr. Speaker, what a startling thought. The government of the day listening to the people of the province. But here we are with this government on this day, determined to put us back 100 years. Is this a Liberal plan, or is this a Kathleen Wynne initiative? I don't know. On September 5th of 2003, then Liberal Premier Dalton McGuinty said in an exclusive interview with the Toronto Sun's editorial board, quote, this is McGuinty, deregulation and privatization haven't worked, and we can't go back there. I've drawn a lesson from that. Number one, we've got to keep hydro public, end quote. So, right? So, who is driving this? Premier Wynne, you don't have the moral authority. The legal authority you are borrowing from Tory legislation. You don't have a mandate. You haven't consulted the owners, the people of Ontario. Have you really thought this through? Do you have any clue the damage that you are doing? Do you care? You are going to get rid of 10 or 20 years of profit, and you are selling the future out from under our kids. And somehow, you're defending that decision. I would also ask you on a point of interest, what are you going to do with the statue? Are you going to bury that too of Sir Adam Beck? Or are we going to melt that down for the bronze and sell it off? This government says it is accountable and transparent. Transparent? The only thing that is clear is that this Premier and her blind followers don't know right from wrong. And this is a historic turning point, Mr. Speaker. This government is flipping the switch on opportunity and growth in the province. Ontarians will pay the price now and for generations to come. This government, though, if they don't stop for sober second thought, are going to have to live with doing this to Ontario. Selling public power is an awful thing to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for